Now, for a broader analysis of the regional as well as bilateral ties in the Northeast Asian region, I had a chance to sit down with John Nilsson Wright. He is the head of the Asia program at Chatham House, an international affairs think tank based in London. Let's start off with this trilateral summit between South Korea, China, and Japan. It comes after a gap of 3.5 years. It goes without saying that this will contribute to the improvement of stability in the Northeast Asian region. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, you're right to say this is long overdue. There's been a lot of concern in the region, but also further afield in the US, about the lack of dialogue between these three critical Northeast Asian nations. So the fact that they're meeting is a good sign. It's a sign that there is an appetite politically at the levels of the heads of government in each of those countries to try and find a useful framework for further discussion on a range of different issues. China especially would like to see an opportunity to promote its own economic interests. And economic interdependency is something that all three countries, I think, recognize is important and has to be encouraged. So I think the goal for all three states is finding a way in which they can talk about some of these issues and to lay down the foundation for further cooperation.
Let's now move over to South Korea-Japan relations. Of course, the bilateral summit at this time around, it marked the very first time that President Park and Prime Minister Abe sat together, just the two of them, a one-on-one since taking office, which I believe is unprecedented.
The worry on the part of public opinion in all those different areas and countries that Japan has not really acknowledged its responsibility during the wartime period of having been the agent behind this program of enforced prostitution. It has been a real sticking point. So what we're seeing, I think, now is an attempt to subtly, from Japan's point of view, indicate to its neighbours, particularly to South Korea, that it takes those concerns seriously, that it's prepared to address them. So I think that's a welcome development.
What do you think would take Japan to settle once and for all this issue of sex slavery by the Japanese military during World War II?
That's a very difficult question. I think the boldest thing that a Japanese leader could do would be to establish a formal fund supported by the government to provide official financial compensation without the ambiguity that was associated with past payments, an official declaration from the government and the provision of direct financial assistance, perhaps also with a letter from the Prime Minister in an official capacity. I think that's probably unrealistic, although who knows, that might be a possibility in the future. It's often said that in terms of making amends for the legacy of the war, symbolic gestures could be quite important.
How do you foresee the relationship between South Korea and Japan unfolding or developing in the immediate to long-term future?
Well, it's always a difficult game, isn't it, anticipating the future. I'm wary of looking too far ahead. I think there are encouraging signs. The summit itself is a very welcome development. I think a healthy sense of pragmatism is evident on both sides. There are many areas in which there can be more cooperation. The challenge of addressing the threat from the DPRK, how best to respond to the challenge of China is not immediately clear whether Tokyo and Seoul are on the same page here. And there have been, of course, concerns, even in Washington, that President Park's overtures to Beijing may be a source of potential division between the US and its two key regional allies, Japan and South Korea. So it's not a trouble-free relationship. The question of China, I would argue, is going to be the biggest challenge because of concerns over regional security, because of questions about how close economically to partner with China. The economic logic of interdependence is very important. The reality that economic connections between countries don't necessarily, of their own accord, produce stability and security. And I think that's going to be probably the #1 concern over the next few years. And it will take real leadership on the part of both President Park, Prime Minister Abe, and Xi Jinping to ensure that conflict does not become a source of tension in the region.